Thanks everyone so much for coming. I'm Alex, I'm the founder of Stainless. Welcome to our office. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for hosting us.
For those who don't know, Stainless API, we're a company that generates SDKs for your REST API. We work with companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and many others to produce pip install OpenAI or npm install Anthropic or any other library wrapping your REST API. So we are very excited about all forms of making it easier for computers to talk to computers. We'll be talking more about that. And today we have Dan Schipper from Every is going to be moderating our panel discussion. I've known Dan for many years, and he runs a newsletter company and also apps company now called Every, which publishes a lot of really great content around AI and other subjects. I'll let you introduce a little more. And would you like to introduce the panelists?
Is my mic on? Can everyone hear me? Yeah. I will let the panelists introduce themselves.
All right.
But very excited to be here, everybody. This conversation is going to be amazing. As Alex said, I'm Dan Schipper. I run a company called Every. We do ideas and apps at the edge of AI. So one part of the business is we have a daily newsletter. Whenever a new model comes out, we have a day zero hands-on review of what works and what doesn't. And then on the other side of the business, we have a product studio. We incubate and run AI products. We bundle everything together so you pay one price and you get access to everything we write and everything we make. So let's start over here and then we'll go this way and everyone introduce themselves. You already introduced yourself, so you're first. Yeah.
I'm Cohen. I'm an engineer working for Anthropic. I work on the API team there. Work very closely with Alex and the team here at Stainless. And yeah, I've been involved in the API since I joined back in August and have been working a lot with MCP. So I'm excited to talk with all of you about it today.
Sweet.
Yes. My name is Tom. I'm the founder and CEO of Svix. We do webhook sending as a service. So we help companies like Brex, Lob, Benchling, Rattray, and many others too. And we essentially power the webhooks with a simple, they integrate with our simple API, and we send all the webhooks on their behalf. And yeah, I've been an engineer for all my life, now a bit of a CEO, so don't get to code that much, but love APIs and excited.
Hey everyone, is this working?
Yeah.
My name is Shashank. I work at OpenRouter. I'm a founding engineer. We're still a very small team, but we built a unified interface to use any LLM on the market. We have over 400 models. So I work with APIs all the time, and our goal is to just make it really easy to use any LLM you want. So excited to talk about that.
Cool. I'm Ilan. I'm an engineer on the developer experience team at OpenAI, and my time is kind of split between making early prototypes for any features that we're shipping to kind of help people have a better idea of what they can do with it, and then making developer resources and developer tools like Codex CLI. And if any of you use the early prototype of Swarm, that was me as well.
Sweet. So I think the place I want to start is just with the title of this panel, MCP and the Future of AI. MCP is one of those words that's a buzzword, and I think in AI there's a sort of acronym soup we can get lost in, and I think it's really important for us to talk about what it actually is and what it's actually useful for. How do we separate the hype from the reality? So what I would love is for any of our panelists to start is talk about what you actually see it being used for, what's it useful for, and what is it not so useful for, or what are the use cases that you think are overhyped?
A coworker of mine, John, actually presented today at a summit, an AI summit happening in San Francisco, and he works on the MCP team. And he literally had a slide panel up that was exactly this question, which was, should I use MCP for everything? And then the subtitle was, yes, asterisk. Which is, I thought was a very applicable answer. I think people hear the phrase MCP and they think that, like you said, it's this big hype thing.
Yeah.
The reality of it is that it's JSON RPC calls or objects. It's not anything more complex than that. It's just a way to standardize getting context from the outside world into the LLM so that it can make more effective decisions for you. So what should it be used for? It should be used for like any instance where you think it might be easier for you, or you think you need to get context into the model that you probably wouldn't want to implement more than once.
You wouldn't want to implement more than once. What does that mean?
That's a good question. So one of the benefits of MCP is that you can implement your server. You could be Asana, you could be Notion, you could be Google Drive. You can implement your server once, and you can say, this is how you talk to me. And then any LLM that is on the other side of it, that is a client, an MCP client, whether that's Anthropic's, OpenAI's, Llama's, it doesn't really matter, can talk to it using the exact same language. Just a way to shake hands.
Great. Does anyone have anything they want to add or maybe argue with there? Is there anything? Yeah, go for it.
Well, I've wanted to have this kind of discussion for a while. I think publicly is like one of the best times. So the first time I saw, I think the first time I saw MCP, I was like very like kind of curious. I was like, this seems like a very interesting thing, but I'm not really sure what it is. And so I started to dig through it, and the first question that I kind of start to grapple with is like, how is this fundamentally different than just like a few function calls in an API? And maybe I would love to hear like everyone's kind of thoughts on this, but I'll kind of lead with like where I've arrived since that point, which is sort of like, it's a really nice way to package functions into one identifier, right? Beyond that, like, because there's a lot of, like, there's so many features in MCP that I think most people don't even use. There's like the resources, the messages, notifications, right? People kind of forgot about those, or I don't know if people see them, but that's kind of where my head is at. And I would love to know like how, like beyond actual definitions, how is everyone thinking of like actually using MCP?
Yeah, I think you described it pretty well. I think of MCPs as whenever you want structured data, it's useful to just have an API that will feed you deterministic things, because models are already so non-deterministic. So if you get to control some of the inputs, it can like lead to better results. And so when I want to know the weather, there's no reason for it to use like a Google search, like broad API to go get weather. It can just call a weather API. So in like similar cases, there's like some tools that are useful if the model knows that they exist and can use them. And MCP is really just like another, like it's like a REST API or an SDK, but like built for LLMs in mind. And I think with any AI buzzword, sometimes you can go overboard with them. But if you use them for like specific things to give it access to structured data that's outside the model's like original context, I think they can be very useful.
Yeah. Oh wow, I'm loud. I think of if you're writing software that's integrating with AI, and you want to give it information, you can do that very simply by putting information in the context window. Which, quick pause. When I said that sentence, raise your hand if you like knew what I was talking about. Just to do a quick gut check on the audience. Okay. And so. So if you're building an integration, there's some very simple ways of giving AI information. If you want the AI to dynamically decide what information it wants, you can do that often with function calling. And if you want it to decide a lot, like very, very dynamically, you might use MCP, right? Where you might want it to choose between a really, really broad number of things that it might get access to information from or do. But building software applications with code is only one of, in my, we're all still learning and building a mental model here, but one of three major buckets. The other major bucket is a chat interface, right? So I'm chatting with Claude, or I'm chatting with ChatGPT, or I'm chatting with some other chat interface, and I want to say, hey, can you book me a flight, or can you tell me what's going on in my calendar today, so on and so forth. MCP is obviously phenomenal for that, and I think has been rolling out more and more. And then the third is sort of the co-pilot kind of use case. So I'm using some productivity software, right? Today it's pretty much primarily coding editors, right? So Cursor and Windsurf and so on. And you're saying, hey, can you help me do my job, right? Can you help me write code or do something else? And I want you to do that really, really powerfully and productively. I want you to go read documentation and go figure things out and go see what's on my computer or go see what I said in Slack yesterday. And so those three buckets are sort of how I think about that.
So if I was going to summarize the point you're making, like if I'm a founder or a CTO or a product manager in the audience, and I've got an SDK, I've got an API, and I'm like, should I implement MCP? I guess your take is that MCP is when you want to allow AIs to interact with whatever your product provides in a like unstructured, like sort of free-form way. And if you want to have more control over exactly what you provide and don't provide, that's when you would probably use an API or
more traditional API REST.
How do you guys think about that?
I think it's interesting. It was an interesting point, particularly because Ilan mentioned this. There's a lot of like underrated aspects of MCP that people don't really look at. People see tools and they're like, okay, it's a way to do tools, which is kind of true, but it's not the full story. Like one of the interesting aspects of it is that based on who's authenticating on the client side, whether that's me or you can actually return a dynamic list of tools, resources, depending on whatever your auth role is within that server. So I just heard the word deterministically, and it was interesting because like there is a little bit more of a dynamic nature there, and I think it's honestly on us as the people who are like disseminating this information and like integrating and building apps around it to actually like utilize these things to their full extent. An area that I think is like really, really underrated and not really getting used anywhere as far as I can tell is the concept of notifications, which is a server letting you know or letting the end user application know actually like you did something wrong. The user tried, I don't know, sending a bomb somewhere. No more access for these set of resources or these tools or something like that.
Interesting. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, I think. Oh,
I thought notifications were just to like complete a long running task, something like that. That was my understanding. But I guess to your point, like I don't really see anybody using them yet. I don't think I've seen any use cases that use anything other than functions. Which does makes it interesting. It's like what is the full purpose of MCP? Do we stick to functions like what works, or like how do you like start to actually explore the different parts? So actually, yeah, Michael, I don't know if like I think you might be the best person here to talk about like how do you imagine people should use these other features of MCP that they're not using? And I would love to know.
Yeah, that's fair. I am not nearly creative enough to answer that full question, or else I would probably have quit my job and been a co-founder. It's a really good point. I think we talk about this a lot internally, which is how do we, as the company that like kind of help foster this protocol, actually help it come to its full potential. And I think a lot of that has to both be us as well as OpenAI and other companies that are kind of backing this as a protocol now to really showcase the best of those features. I don't know. I don't know how to like fully answer that question. I think resources are probably more intuitive as something that could be added. Right? A resource is just any sort of document. It could be your audio files, your images, text, anything that might be relevant that you think the LLM should have. And I think the interesting paradigm there is that you can actually just like fetch those at once when you start up the application. And then depending on your UI, if it's like some sort of conversational chat, you could just render those on the side and say like, hey, this is what you have available to you for you to use in this session. Like, do you want to just add this to your chat and start using it? I'm not a UX designer, so I don't know if you should actually take my advice on that. But I think that like this is, again, we should maybe pause and reflect on the fact that MCP, I think, was announced in November of 2024. So my answer, let's let people cook a little bit.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges as well is that we are very, we're all engineers here, right, on the panel. And I think a lot of the people here are engineers as well. And everything we're building is very engineering centric. So we just, now remote MCPs are actually becoming a thing. I don't know if really a thing, and that means that you don't have to install stuff locally and you can use it from the ChatGPT or Claude. Like web UI. And I think we're just going to discover so much about how people are going to use it and how people want to use it the moment it actually hits like real people. And I mean, not engineers, because we can just work around everything, right? We can just, I'm going to build my own MCP server. Oh, I don't like this. I'm going to write a script. And I think we're going to really find out what's going to happen with that.
Engineers aren't real people. Engineers are all I get.
Yeah. Everyday people.
Another thing I think about, which is an interesting take, is that engineers love APIs because we love structure. We want like to control the input and control the outputs. But that's very like antithetical to how models work, because they love unstructured inputs, unstructured outputs. And I think that MCP, like this is maybe like not even like the next 2 years, but long term, I have a feeling that maybe MCPs will just become agents. So you're like ask ChatGPT a question, and rather than going to the Shopify MCP, it goes to the Shopify agent and just like sends the question it has, and then the Shopify agent internally figures out what tools to use. So like it's just these LLMs talking to LLMs, and in that world, maybe you don't need MCPs at all because it's just fully agentic.
I think that's a great transition to the next thing I want to talk about, which is like, what does the future look like for computers talking to computers, right? Like we started in this world where you have an API, you have like a really well-defined spec. We're moving into an MCP world, which is maybe a little bit more loosey-goosey, and now you're talking about like you're actually just talking to an agent. The agent's going to go off and do a bunch of work, and maybe you have a conversation back and forth. It's not just like one request and a response. It's like a whole thing with state. Is that the future? And also, what are the trade-offs? Like, I'm sure you're sitting here being like, well, there's a lot of reasons why you need to have an API or an SDK built in a particular way. And so, I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on that.
Cool. So I can take this one. So I think let's start with what's not going to change, right? We built so much infrastructure around web APIs and all the routers, everything. We're not going to change all of that. API gateways, load balancers, authentication methods. So I think a lot of it is just going to look exactly the same in many ways, like all of the underlying infrastructure.
Boring.
I'm just kidding. Sure, there are going to be reasons to change some stuff, but it's going to take a very long time. Like, as we said, like we launched MCP like in November 2024. This is not how the rest of the infrastructure of the internet is going to change. It's not going to be that rapid. But I think one thing that is going to change, what you were saying, is that I think APIs are going to be much larger in their scope. So instead of, at the moment MCPs, they kind of like look at tools. There's one tool, list all the flights, and then like check all the available seats, and then another tool to like buy it. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see just more tools and more APIs to just like, hey, here's my spec, book me a flight.
Yeah.
So I think that's very much agree with that.
Yeah.
One thing I think is the future of computers talking to computers, right? Like the internet is mostly that, right? Computers talking to each other, and anyone who works in internet software knows that most internet traffic, most of the bytes that are bouncing back and forth over the internet is API traffic, right? So one part of the future is just that there's going to be even more of it, right? Sure. There will be more computers talking to computers, one way or another, as long as you classify an AI as a computer in some sense, right? And maybe there's some folks who would, we're going to get to all sorts of interesting ethical considerations. I don't know.
They're just silly little guys. What do you got?
Yeah, exactly. Beyond that, I think there's a lot of like really, really interesting questions that are really hard to predict. At Stainless, we think about this stuff a lot. And some of it even comes down to, like we generate MCP servers for REST APIs, and we spend a lot of time working to basically be able to take any OpenAPI spec and make sure that it'll work reasonably well with MCP. And there's, we have a blog post, I don't know if David's around who wrote it, but a lot of interesting nitty-gritties there. And one of the things that's hard for us to solve is sometimes API responses, for example, are just really large, right? And that works great in contexts where you have somebody's server in AWS East 1 and somebody else's server also in AWS East 1, and they're just sending some JSON back and forth, like no problem. All the information's available, you pick what you want, and that's great. And if you're in a situation where you have a long-running context chat, okay, that's actually not great. And to what Shashank was saying earlier, maybe you want things to be compressed and condensed where you're only getting the information sent back and forth that you want. And you want that really dynamic. And the way you might do that could be agentic, right? Maybe instead of using JSON, you just use plain text, and it's literally, a Claude model saying, "Hey, bro, can you book me a flight?" And then, an OpenAI model just doing that and saying, "Got you," right? And that's the text over the line, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, I was on the flight here earlier today, and I was sitting next to some people who work in Hollywood. Apparently, there's a Tribeca Film Festival going on also. And in Hollywood, they have these things, really mysterious things called assistants. And apparently this is how the whole industry runs, right? So you'll have like a writer and like a producer who need, a writer will say, "Oh, I need X, Y, and Z, and all this stuff has to happen." And they'll say that to their little, it's a human being. I don't know if you knew this. You can have human being assistants. And that person will literally iMessage the assistant of the other person. And this is just how the whole industry operates.
I'll have my people call your people.
Right.
That's
right.
their MCP.
And that's their MCP, right? And it's like, is that going to be the future of APIs? Now, I don't think so. I think that's actually pretty unlikely. But it's really interesting to think about. And is gRPC actually going to prove to be better for company-to-company interaction, where today REST works a lot better? Is it GraphQL? Is it some other wildly new thing? I think there's some really, really interesting questions there.
I think you touched on something interesting there, which is there are, there's the gRPC side of things, or like JSON API for data, but then there's the conversation about the data, where it's I want to make an API call to this bank. The API is broken. Now I need to email the people on the bank and have them tell me how to use the API correctly. It's clearly they're both interactions with kind of the same entity, but they're very profoundly different flavors of interaction. And I think we can learn a lot from that for how AI systems will do the same. There's the main, right now I think we conflate it, right? You have a conversation and then the assistant can call a function and then get a JSON dump of the response and then process it. And it's well, really it would want to maybe look at the schema before it gets the response, write a parser, and then only get the stuff that it cares about. We're mixing data, I don't know, bits data, and it's almost two different layers of the network stack.
That's actually where I always end up concluding as well, actually, is that I like to say the future of AI is cyborgs, in the sense, yeah, thank you. In a sense, so a cyborg, right, classically, is a human with some machine component, right? And you think of AI as having a traditional computer, a traditional software sort of subprocess, where most of its thinking is through the neural nets, but some of its thinking is, let me sit down and write a little Python script and run that, right, or whatever. And you run into you ask a quantitative question, or you ask a question that involves some data processing, and if you were to ask that to a smart analyst, someone we all have people on our teams, or we do this ourselves, where you ask them a tricky question, and they're going to pull out a pen and paper, right, or they're going to pull out a Python REPL to solve the answer, and AI is doing this more and more. And so my prediction is actually that the computer use tool is going to be one of the most powerful and most frequently used. And for this API question of okay, you get a huge API response back, what's the information you want? I agree. I think it's going to be the AI writes a little snippet of code that pulls out that information. And so there's a plug there for SDKs where obviously the machine is going to want to see type information about that and have that be really simple and easy to know exactly what the possibilities are. But I don't want to talk the book too much.
No, that was very well put. I think that something that you mentioned with just asking LLMs to constantly do a lot of things that you could have just coded your way to doing feels a little backwards. We should not be asking an LLM how many R's are in strawberry and watch it go crazy about that. That feels like a weird paradigm. A smart LLM would, or an LLM that's harnessed correctly, more accurately, would just pull out its little Python notebook and be how many R's are in strawberry, and just write out the little code, and figure that out. And it's a lot more deterministic, much more verifiable by you as a human. And I think that an area that's actually going to get very, very interesting very soon is seeing how that layer of things, it writing code and executing it, also interacts with things that are more like traditional in the AI space, like tool calling and MCP, and just accessing resources and things like that. I think it's going to be a real.
That feels like the next layer, right?
Yeah.
It's like, because why would you have, like, if you have this like super crazy, like, I don't know, like O3, Claude 4, like just giving it like this silly little problem, like, hey, what is the weather in this place? Or like, what is, if I asked you to do that, there is no way that you would sit down and like look at the response, the raw response coming in and read it with your eyes and then tell me what the answer is. There's no way, right? You would write some code for that. And I think like that's exactly what Mike was saying. But it feels like it's a very fundamental thing where right now we're getting LLMs to be really good at doing anything once, but then they sort of have to keep doing it. I think we're going to very quickly get to a point where we're really good at getting LLMs to instead make a thing that does what you asked way more efficiently than if they were doing it themselves. And that feels like the second layer.
We're already. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Actually, so one thing I want to ask that side of the panel. You know, like you love types, I love types as well. Like I think those are great. And I think where we're lacking, the MCP, for example, the lack of an output schema was like an odd choice in my point of view. I don't know if odd, but like at least like lacking in some areas.
Yeah, that's fair. I think a lot of the original design for the spec for MCP was based off existing paradigms for tool calling. I mean,
For sure.
But I agree. I think that's a clear like gap. I wouldn't be surprised if like things like that.
I'm not judging, as you said, you launched it like a few months ago, but
of course.
I think the question is like, do you think there's going to be like a new DSL programming language, it's like very type heavy, very specific for LLMs, like how they want to interact with the world? And because I think like if you look at like a lot of the great LLM examples and use cases, it's with like tight feedback loops. So they do something, they get feedback, they can test and run test, augment, all of that kind of things. So I do wonder if a language that actually has like very strict type checking, very good SDKs, as you mentioned, maybe a limited scope so that it can do less. So it's maybe just limited to workflows instead of, so you can avoid the halting problem and like all of those kind of things. I wonder if that's, I don't know, is that something you're working on maybe?
Coming out today.
Thank you.
No, I think there's this concept in the AI space called the bitter lesson, which is effectively summarized is try to treat the AIs that you're developing as if they are humans, and like try to think about if you were given a problem to solve, that problem that you're giving the LLM, how would you as a person solve it? So Ilan brought that up, right? Like you would never go and like look at like JSON and like start parsing through it. Like that would be a silly way to like go solve that problem. And I think that the same kind of applies here, where I would be very surprised if we saw things that are like unintuitive for maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, are unintuitive for humans suddenly become super intuitive for LLMs. I mean, they are much better at us at a lot of things already, but those are just kind of the natural things.
So you don't think Haskell is the answer?
No, not Haskell. Okay. But I think that there's something to be said about like strongly typed languages, which I think is the point that you're trying to get at.
Yeah.
But I think all of you should go do this. Anybody who has access to like various software languages on their laptops, try asking it to solve a problem for you in an untyped language like Python, and then try to ask it to solve the same type of problem in a strongly typed language, Java, TypeScript, maybe not Java, but TypeScript, something that has a very strong like type adherence. You're going to see it perform a lot better when it can like verifiably check the existing code that's there, but also be like, oh, okay, like I can infer from this type right here, like what's going on here. You're actually implicitly giving it context that it's then using, which is, I think that is a better way to think about this paradigm.
And I do want to just build on that before you answer, because I want to hear your answer to that part as well. And I think that DSL as well, that special language, can also give SDKs like a better way to communicate statically with the API what it's doing wrong. Anyhow, curious to hear what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, the part of what, at the meta point here is that if AI can iterate faster, it can think faster and do more, right?
Yeah.
And just do a better job at anything. And so, like my prediction has basically been, okay, you write code and then you use an LSP, a language server protocol, to say, hey, is this good? Is this all good? Can I keep going here? And is this code going to work? in comparison, for example, if you make an API request, if you have to if there's no types at all, you have to make an API request and see what came back, and then next thing you know, your AI is emailing support at a bank to try to see how to do the next thing. Like that's not going to work so well. But I actually have a conspiracy theory on this one. Dan always loves my conspiracy theories.
Always.
Which is that I've been actually personally very surprised that we haven't seen more of LSPs guiding AIs as they write code, right? So I think a lot of people know about the structured outputs features in the OpenAI API, for example, where you can say, hey, only give me back JSON that fits this schema, and there's something that's guiding every single token to say, is this conforming to am I producing output that is allowed, right? And I think it's a phenomenal feature. I think it's a wildly underrated feature. But I've been surprised that hasn't happened when writing code, right? Because when you're an engineer writing in your editor and you say, okay, stripe dot charges dot PYM tab, right? You get a red squiggly line because you forgot the word A for payments. Stripe doesn't actually have that, and so even still you get a red squiggly line, and you can know exactly okay, with autocomplete what can come next. And so it's wild to me that AIs are writing code that doesn't compile. And however, the problem is that interacting with an LSP over a network can be really slow. And so my conspiracy theory is that, as Michael was saying, TypeScript is actually probably a really great language for other reasons as well, for AI to write code in. But the LSP is kind of slow. And as some people may know, Microsoft recently announced that they rewrote all of TypeScript in Go to make the type checker faster. And my thinking is that Microsoft wants Azure to be able to say very, very quickly, very frequently, hey, AIs that are really writing all this code, here's what you can do next. And so I have zero verification of this. It's probably false. There's a million reasons that you want a fast type checker, but it is funny.
I like it.
Anything you want to tell us?
No, I like it.
I think very much agreed to everything that Alex is saying. And there's another, I think, meta layer, which is that we're talking about basically verifiability. And the reason that models are good at code is even if they don't have an LSP, at least once they write the code, they can compile it, test it, run it. And having those kind of guardrails helps it iterate. And as we try and make everything more agentic, I think one of the biggest blockers is, can we give it the right guardrails? Can we verify that the output is correct? Because even today, we have really good code writing agents, but almost none of that code is being directly pushed to production, right? Because you need a human in the loop to verify. And I think the next unblock happens for agentic workflows in general when we have LSPs for code writing, but in general, good verifiability. If I'm asking it to book a flight, can I make sure it's booking the time that I said, for the right price? And you don't want to manually do that verification. So how can we create those guardrails for AI across the board outside of just code? Yeah. I think is going to be really big as well.
I actually have a question for everybody here, which is we're all software engineers, and we write code relatively often. Some CEOs less. But what is your a lot of us are using LLMs to write our code. What's your bar for approving a chunk, a PR, or even a feature? Do you want to see it write tests? Are you reading line by line? Where are we at with confidence levels?
That's a good question. I don't know if anyone has had this experience. I feel like it's pretty common where first you're okay, let's see how good it is. And then you start to trust it more and more, and you give it more and more, and then you give it too much. And then you're in a maze. And you're okay, I'm actually gonna walk it back now. And so everyone has a sort of curve, and then you kind of stabilize to some point. I think currently sort of my point right now is I'm starting to try out for example, Codex, which I can just give off tasks to do. I think Codex is still, in my opinion, best for very well constrained things that I can give in large code bases and just trust and do. But I won't let it do an end-to-end front end app that I'm working on. right? And then on the other hand, I use Cursor every day, and I've sort of stopped using the Cursor agent entirely, and I've gone entirely to just using like Command K and like Cursor tab, which feel much more like co-piloty. I'm still the one thinking. So maybe this doesn't directly answer your question, but I think what I'm looking for is like, did it do what I imagined in my head, and does the code run? Like in those cases that are more constrained. In the more codex cases, it's more like, do the test pass?
Yeah. That seems to be an interesting bottleneck. It's about, can you give the state that's in your head to the model, and then can you efficiently have the model pass back to you what it did? Yeah. And one way to solve for that is a shorter leash. So like you're chatting with it and you're sort of like very close to everything that it's doing. So your state's updating as its state's updating, but there are other ways to do it. I think that's a really interesting UX challenge for agents.
Yeah. To tie it all back to MCP, I think that we're going to see a lot of very interesting developer tool facing MCPs. I mean, we're already starting to see that a little bit more, but like Tom mentioned, with remote MCPs becoming more commonplace, I think it'll be a little bit more ergonomic. So it'll start, I think, becoming more commonplace and more boring to have MCPs. But a lot of them, I think, will be like deeply integrated into our dev loops to like verify and do whatever else is that we need to do.
And
Oh, I was good. I love O3, by the way. Like, I feel like for me, agentic coding changed when O3 came out. And I use this tool called Devin by Cognition Labs. And we've had it for like 8 months now. And even like 2 months ago, if I would give it a task, I'd have like 20% success rate. Like if you give it something, 20% of the time I could just merge it without having to make any changes or ask it for any changes. It's now at like 40% of the time I'm able to merge a PR. Like you send a Slack message, it creates the PR, and then you just hit merge. And I can do that 40% of the time. And now it like can read GitHub comments. So you like go from a Slack message to a PR, review the PR, it fixes everything, and then you hit merge. And that's like 70 to 8. Like I'm merging like 5 to 7 PRs a day now that are fully like from Slack to GitHub and then merge, where I'm not writing any code for it. And you have to treat it like an intern. You have to pass a lot of state. You have to expect that it's going to make like if you don't give it enough information, it's going to go on the wrong path. So you have to like remove the possible pitfalls in your context. So I spend like 5 to 10 extra minutes giving it the task. But those 5 to 10 minutes save like an hour to 2 hours of me just like manually writing the code. And then similarly, like, so I have that agentic workflow, but then when I'm in my editor, I actually like I feel way faster myself writing the code. So then I'm just using tab complete. I'm honestly not even using Command K or agent. Maybe sometimes if there's like a linter error I don't understand, I'll end up using it. But so it's like now it's become 2 flows, like an agentic flow and just like Copilot, like make me faster at writing code.
I have actually seen the same thing. So like definitely O3 was a step change in terms of agentic coding. And then I think Opus 4 in Claude Code was another big one. Like one of the things I love most about my job is I get to try new models before they come out. So like the day before Opus 4 came out, I was using it in Claude Code with Kieran, he's the GM that runs Cora, which is our AI email assistant. And I shipped a PR to production. I've never touched the Cora code base, and I shipped a PR to production with him on the phone with me. Like we were screen sharing and just chatting, and we just like shipped it. And I was like, holy shit. And he has become this like absolute wizard where he's got like 5 different Claude codes working all at the same time, and he's shipping like 5 PRs a day, and it's crazy. And I think he's found the same thing. Like there are all these new engineering principles you need to adhere to if you're going to do stuff like this. So for example, what he has spent a lot of time doing is building prompts that allow him to say, here's the feature I want to build, and it expands it into this like gigantic document that lives in GitHub. And so he's spending most of his time basically grooming PRDs in GitHub issues, and then picking them off and sending them to Claude Code. And that's the way that he avoids having like a lot of bugs and a lot of issues where he's like, I don't know how this works. Is he gives it a good enough plan that it can just go autonomously and do it.
Yeah. I was recently working on a demo for the conference where we announced Cloud 4, and I'm a terrible front-end engineer, like really, really bad, like worse than you think, like bad. And I essentially did exactly what you described, where I wrote a PRD for it. I like got some design mocks from Figma, threw both of those in there, and then I was like, okay, how do you want to go ahead and implement this? And like we like just chatted a little bit about like how to break that down into like discrete tasks, and then I essentially just parallelized that across a couple of different instances of it.
Yeah.
It was still pretty bad, but like it was, it was way better than what I would have done. It was way better than what I would have done.
Yeah, and I think that's where I kind of got that thing I said earlier about sharing state, is that one of the problems with this way of coding is you have to spend a lot of time like editing this PRD, which is just like not as fun in a lot of ways, but it's more productive. So
PMs.
yeah. So there's like a really interesting like UX issue there, where it's like how do you let an engineer like make something like that without it being like incredibly boring?
Also, I think while I act, right, I write code and I better understand the problem as I write it. And I think that's been my challenge with a lot of the tools, is that all the part where I get my learning, like all of this, like building the scaffolding and understanding, oh, this should have this should not have that, like that's taken away from me. And then it's really hard for me. I have to go back and kind of like try to understand essentially someone else's code. So that's been a challenge for me that I do wonder how it's going to be solved in a UX way.
Yeah, so far I've honestly only been given agentic tasks that I already had like the full plan in my head, and it's just the mechanical work of writing the code. Because in production, as soon as you don't understand even like a small part of your code base, it becomes really hard to like, it's like those small misunderstandings start stacking up in production, and then all of a sudden you have a bug and you have no idea how to fix it. So I think it's very important to still read every single line of code. And that's like my battle, is that I'm not truly vibe coding ever, because it's production, right? Like if you're doing prototypes and throwaway projects, I think it's really fun to vibe code and lovable. But if I'm shipping things to production, like it's tight, it's not vibes, right? Like, and I think that's important to understand and draw the line, especially when we're shipping things and it's like gonna impact like the business in a material way.
Yeah, to tie this back a little bit more into the just the conversation of context and like what does it look like to actually set these things up for success. I think that like we underrate the overhang between like an okay prompt to a good prompt to like a really, really good prompt. And I think people will often give up in that middle phase because even that good prompt didn't get them where they want to be. But like really, if they had spent a couple more extra minutes just like thinking about how this is going to be perceived by the LLM, like thinking of it like an intern, you would have really, really been able to get there. And I think that applies to like, honestly, the code that we set up, the prompts that we just give it for our day-to-day work, for conversations that we like to have with it. Don't get me wrong, these models are getting smarter and they're getting better at reading between the lines. But it's always, I think, better to assume that they don't and maybe over-explain things to them. And I think a lot of that also ties back to how you set up your MCP servers and the tools that you give it. The ergonomics of like giving it a certain tool actually matter a lot more than people are actually giving it credit right now.
You guys also have at Anthropic like a really good prompt improver that I think very few people know about, but it works really well no matter what LLM you're using. Yeah. I think that's also, you bring up a really interesting thing about like the ergonomics of tools and functions. And one question on my mind is, what's the right level of abstraction? Like if let's say you're building like a flight booker, right? Is it the book flight tool, or is it like, do you split it up into more parts? How do you think about designing those interfaces?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Personally, I hate the flight agent demo.
Okay.
But it's okay.
Change it to whatever you want.
No, let's roll with it. I just think it's like, I don't think I'll ever ask an AI to like book my flight ever. But sorry. I think that like, think about how you might give it to your assistant, your real human assistant. You might want to give it.
I go to flights.google.com, man.
All right, sorry. In your Hollywood assistant.
All right. Okay.
You might tell your assistant like, hey, these are the things that I like. I like to sit first class and I like to fly Delta, and I don't like flying in the morning. Those are like the things that you would probably tell your like a real intern that works for you, and you have to like try to extrapolate that backwards to like how you will actually build and expose those tools. So realistically, one of those features has to be something like a search function, and that search function has to have like a reasonable amount of filters such that the MCP server can then go and make whatever API call it needs to fetch those flights. But then in terms of like actually booking that flight, now we're getting into a little bit of a subject that we were talking about earlier, which is like, do I want to give an LLM my credit card? I don't know. That's up for discussion.
I would, but anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what Alex was talking about earlier about determinism. Like, I don't think we're gonna give the flight agent, sorry, it's a good example, but like, we're gonna give the book flight agent like just a word description like every time. I think it can be easily solved by constraints, like actual software constraints. Like if I had an intern work and like write some like piece of code to encode my constraints, I think that can be easy to build. And I think we're gonna find, this is me just by shooting in the dark, I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but like LLMs generating those constraints that we're going to be able to visually see and verify and approve. And then this time, they're going to have this like fixed workflow that just supports what we want to do anyway. I mean, this is like, this is already possible and it's not happening. So maybe I'm very wrong, but I think those constraints are going to be something that's going to be very powerful, because I don't want to mess up my flight, right? You want to use Google because you want to look at it before you book it.
Yeah, I think there's ways in which it's very similar to giving an assistant or giving like a human sensitive information to work on, right? You will slowly, as it like proves to you that it's able to do things correctly, you might trust more and more. There's one key difference, and it's that a human can't get prompt injected, and an LLM can. And I think that level of like spiky unreliability is maybe for me like the biggest issue right now. Like, yeah. I think right now there's like an entire like ocean of like gray hat, black hat hackers licking their lips, just waiting for people to start deploying insecure agents and start like just prompt hacking them to do whatever they want. Like even like MCP servers are a bit of a vector for this, right? Like if you are just trusting these, like essentially, if you are allowing any context whatsoever to be put into your model, in a way, you are trusting that source. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a lot of maturity left in that space where we gotta like develop it. Because right now, if I have a model and I don't completely trust the creators of an MCP server, I would absolutely never give a model that has like connected to anything I don't control, access to anything sensitive.
I think that's a really good question I would love to talk about is the security model for MCP, because the way that we dealt with that on the internet is a single origin policy. So you're only going to execute code from a website, and it's sort of like it's sandboxed to like the information from that website. It's not going to go outside of your computer or into other information in the browser. MCP doesn't have that. So if you prompt inject it, the LLM can just go do whatever with that information. So yeah, what is the right security model for this?
Yeah, really, really good point. It's something that's actually, it's already happened, right? Like there's examples that you could probably find online of people leaking like API keys and secret information because of an MCP server that was intentionally set up for the demo to like prompt inject, but it is a very valid point. I don't know how cosigned what I'm about to say is, but like I think this is a reasonable take. I would assume a zero trust model to anything that is not entirely owned by you. So if you are like making an HTTP request in general, like not ignore MCPs, you're reaching out to a different server, and you're giving it some sort of privileged information or privileged access to the rest of your systems, you better be sure like what's going on that server. And I think that applies for like large-scale enterprise computing in general. I don't think that that's necessarily, it is a problem that's expounded by MCP, but I don't think it's a uniquely MCP problem.
I would disagree, I think. I don't think it's uniquely MCP, but I would disagree with that threat model, because if I write code, I can have some confidence of the control flow. But if I write an agent, like if I write code that takes input or like makes API requests, I can set checks in place and be pretty convinced what the control flow is going to be. But with an agent, I can try to do the same thing. But if it hits any external source that returns anything at all of a sudden, they might take over like the control flow of my agent as if they had just like hacked my server. And I think that's pretty new.
Yeah, but would you, when you're developing code in your local dev loop and you're integrating with some new server, are you using like your Stripe API key in there with like your real funds in there?
Well, let's say I'm like trying to download my email. So recently for the AI Engineer Summit, I made a demo where like I downloaded my emails. And for that, I like wrote a script that had like my local environment variables and I hit the like Gmail API. I would have been comfortable with like the same code, but like a totally different part, hitting like, I don't know, a weather API, right? That's not true if it was an agent, right? If it was an agent and it had access to my emails and it also had access to like a weather API, like I would no longer trust it because I don't know like what the weather API is returning. It could like hijack it in a way that my code can't be unless like I have a critical bug, which is like much more rare.
It is a new security paradigm that we have to think about, but I do think that we have already solved it in some way. Like smart contracts are basically this, right? Like where you write a piece of code, it's verifiable and it like execute the exact same thing every time. And I think MCP agents will it's the same thing when we use libraries. We pin them to a specific version because we have verified that that version of the library is not been attacked or like been made malicious in some way. And I think it's like in some ways there's like an immaturity in MCPs and LLM APIs, but we will realize that, hey, this is a real security threat, and then build tooling and guardrails. And I think it all comes back to guardrails that make sure that the MCP server that I'm using is verified in some way, and that I can pin to it so that someone that pushes a new code to the MCP server doesn't automatically break the thing that I'd already written. And then you have to manually update to a new MCP version or something.
That's interesting. Oh,
I really like that you brought up smart contracts because I think it's actually a really good analogy to like where we are now. Like smart contracts, a crypto term for like a code that you can have manage money effectively. I'm really drastically simplifying, but when smart contracts first became a thing, and up until still now, like wallet drains are a thing. Like contracts that are malicious are a thing. And people are constantly hacking their way around it. And I think that has to be, it's the nature that there's just money involved. And I think MCP is in a very, hopefully not the same trajectory as crypto, but in a very similar kind of state where it's still a very nascent field. I think there's a lot of hype around it. And because of that, there's a lot of people involved who might not necessarily understand the security risks and various like threat models. I think it's like, as technical people, it is our job to make sure that the things that we're building are robust and secure, and also just like educating those around us to be safe.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is what I was talking about earlier with the workflows and all of that, is that you need to contain, you can't have, at the moment we kind of like, it's a mix, it's kind of like a SQL injection. And we're just like shoving strings unverified from like the customer, and we try to escape it. And sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we forget a spot. And I think this is the kind of like the cat and mouse game that we're playing. And what I was saying earlier is that like if the AI actually writes a workflow, and that workflow is not an agent, like it's not gonna read like the response, it's just gonna do this deterministic thing that the AI generated, I think that can just sidestep this whole set of problems.
yeah, that's great. Like if the agent is not directly receiving input, then you're not getting like untrusted input into your highly untrusted application, which is your agent. But yeah, I totally agree. If the agent writes code that does the processing, then you do sidestep that risk.
Because I think one of the problems at the moment as well is that this is magic. Like all these demos that you see are just magical. And I think part of doing like a magical demo is having this like super abstract, I'm gonna write whatever and something crazy is gonna come out. But I think in practice, like in most use cases, it's gonna be way more contained. I don't know if I'm actually gonna go to Google to book flights anymore. Maybe I'm gonna just use Claude or ChatGPT. But definitely we're gonna have more constraints. I can just write, hey ChatGPT, I wanna book a flight. Cool, we're in flight booking mode. And then all of that is gonna be a much more constrained environment where we can do it in a trusted way. There aren't that many use cases in the world, I think.
So we are getting close to time, and I know we have, I wanna take some time to take questions from people. So if anyone in the audience has a question, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to go a little bit into detail about the flight analogy of flight booking. MCPs, no, I mean, the MCPs make you. What MCPs allows you. Thank you. So what I'm asking is, MCP is basically a way to provide an API interface to your LLM, so it can talk to everything that, or like whoever chooses to make an MCP for what was API based earlier. But there's a large part of the internet, specifically like flight booking, which was not available as an API before. It was browsable internet. So how do you feel about that? Which is, how would that evolve between like API based internet for LLMs and now the browser based? Because like things like OpenAI agent and computer use are like triggering that, like solving that problem where your AI agent can browse the internet. And the follow-up question to that is, how do you solve for authentication? Because a lot of these websites need you to log in and solve CAPTCHA and OTPs. So what are your thoughts on how would that evolve?
Browser agents can solve CAPTCHA, by the way. I don't know if you guys have seen these demos. Like, they can solve CAPTCHA now. It's an interest. Like, first of all, even anything you do on the internet, there's an API somewhere. Like, even though you go on flights.google.com and you click book, that website made an API call to like the Delta server to actually book your flight, right? The API exists. Computer use is really nice because it like sidesteps the understanding of the API to just like a simple UI that models have surprisingly gotten pretty good at understanding. We built APIs because computers are bad at understanding unstructured things. Then computers got good at understanding unstructured things, and we're now like, hey, the browser is actually simpler than giving you this flight API because you have to like talk to Delta, get permissions from them to use this API. Like, instead, just go to this website. Again, it all comes down to guardrails and how much trust you have. Because maybe I trust this agent enough to give them my Delta login or like something, and my credit card. Like, it's already all saved on Chrome, right? Or whatever like password manager you use. So it's about how much trust we build with these systems. And API versus browser just comes down to whatever is easier for the agent. Because I think in the future, at some point, they will understand enough to be like, for this thing, I should just go use a website. For this thing, I understand the API, so I'm going to use the API directly. And I think they're going to take away that decision even from us, and the model would just decide.
One aspect I think of this is that AIs are probably going to prefer APIs to UIs, as long as the API is reasonably interpretable. It can work with it. It takes a lot of flops. It takes a lot of compute to go look at open up a website, click around, so on and so forth. And if you instead can just hit the Expedia API, under an MCP server, that's going to take a lot less wall clock time. It's going to take a lot less compute. And so, my prediction would be, if you're Google Flights and you're competing with Expedia, and one of them ships an API, and one of them ships an MCP server around that API, and the other doesn't, well, Michael's still going to choose the UI option, right? But maybe Tom and a bunch of other people are going to go, hey, Chatty, can you book me a flight? And Chatty's probably going to choose the Expedia API rather than clicking around on Google Flights, if that's the only option.
Well, I think the interesting thing is that often the actual browser is the only option because companies specifically disallow API access because they just don't want anyone but humans to use it. And so computer use agents are really cool because they're a way around that. And I think that's going to be an interesting question about how that evolves in the future.
I was recently talking to a customer of ours who was trying to integrate MCP for their internal services within a very large enterprise. I forget which one, but there's a lot of really legacy services that it's literally this person's job to be to unhobble all of it and get it into their new LLM internal chat for use. And a lot of these services are older than me, and they have no APIs and no standardization. And the way that they got around that is they set up a set of MCP servers that under the hood use computer use as a model, and then they just return the outputs from that. So it's like you're starting to chain MCP and LLM calls, but they were able to like somewhat effectively solve that problem for themselves using that. It was a really interesting like creative way to solve that issue.
Yeah, I think kind of going off of that, my maybe a little hot take is it doesn't matter that much, because the models are going to get really good at like, there is a hierarchy of difficulty, but like once it does it once, you can just, it can write code that'll do it again at a lower level of difficulty. Like maybe the first time it takes like computer use, but then it can just set up like the API access that it like would have done. Yeah, so I feel like maybe my take is like, it doesn't matter that much. Like I think we're gonna see whatever companies wanna implement. There's so many companies that should have an API that is like public and documented and don't. And like you can still sort of use it if you reverse engineer it. But yeah, I think like models don't care that much. Like they'll probably, you have to like coerce them to do this, but like they'll probably set it up for themselves. Like with the MCP example, maybe the first time it takes them like 2 days to like book a flight. But then they'll like make their own MCP server that they can hit in the future that does the same thing they just did in like the fewer steps.
One question for you and a general question for the panel. As you move these existing APIs, the performance of the MCP calls of the LLM is very dependent on the names of these tools in some cases. So it's very subjective. So how are you dealing with it? And the larger question is, right now it's the wild, wild west. We have not, everybody's figuring out who's an incumbent, who's the upstart. So it's all rosy and everybody's trying stuff out. But the question that I was hoping that this panel would talk about is around who becomes an MCP client and who becomes an MCP server, right? Research companies are now coming into the app layer. So what happens to existing players? So I'd love for you folks to talk about it. Thank you.
Great. Really quick on your first question. When you upload your OpenAPI spec to Stainless, we will actually use LLMs, we'll use AI to generate a good name for each of the operations, the endpoints in your API. We'll try to corral the information in a way that'll be as interpretable as possible. And then you as the API author have the ability to go in and edit that as well for further clarity. But I'll open it to the...
Yeah, to touch on your second question, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. So I think a paradigm that we're going to start seeing is a single host or node or server, like actual server, not MCP server, that is both an MCP client and an MCP server. And then it can have essentially a bidirectional relationship in either way of getting context into the LLM that's hosted in there, but also sending that context to other clients and other LLMs that might be seeking it. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of those soon.
If I might quickly add, the reason why I'm asking that question is one thing that we've not talked about today is memory.
Mm-hmm.
And as more and more conversations happen on the client, the impact of that is memory, which is critical user data, which then can be used to, compound. That's where the value is.
Mm-hmm.
And hence the question around MCP client versus the server and where do you play? Because that's essentially the surface area.
Are you just asking me about memory in general, or?
No, generally that's the context.
Yeah. It makes sense.
Any other questions?
I have a quick one. Do you have any predictions, like when was May 1st when you guys had the big like Anthropic, the integrations announcement? We saw like Atlassian and Square have mcp.atlassian.com, mcp.square.com, but yet companies are still putting out they're still open sourcing their MCP servers as well. Predict, like, will enterprises will they use those hosted or remote ones, or do you think that like a real enterprise is going to bring that in-house and run it themselves? And then also just really quick, like we use MCPs as developers and like we're watching it, we're kind of interacting with it, but I'm having conversations with like enterprise folks that are like, they're all excited, like they're really hyped about this because the tools that they're, people are prototyping shit like crazy, and they're just dreaming about like agents talking to agents and all this shit happening automatically. But it's kind of scary as hell as well, because we're watching it, we're doing it, and like if it does something messed up, we're running alongside with it. But like the vision that I'm hearing some of these folks in like business users have is, oh shit, this solves all my problems. What are some of your thoughts on that?
I can start. The oh shit, that solves all my problems. The number of times I've heard that for anything that comes out ever is kind of insane. And the answer is always no, it doesn't. And you should like bring them back down to earth. I've talked to companies who are like, we're so excited to like have an agent that can like take this PDF and upload it here, and I'm like, you can do that in a Python script. Like it's not the technology that's holding you back. So yeah, I guess my answer there is, well, I guess it was a multi-part question.
Yeah, it's kind of scary thinking about it as a developer that maybe they're not thinking of looking at it so closely like we are. If it's producing shit or if it's doing something dubious, we're like, they shouldn't be doing that, and we fix it. Whereas it's completely just like, I'm going to use some tool that I found online that has SOC 2 and ISO 27001 in some startup. And then they start running this stuff, and all of a sudden data is exfiltrating somewhere else. Like, we think about those things, I think.
So I trust the lawyers there. I think someone is gonna no, for real. Someone is gonna get sued, and then they're gonna rein it in and like make sure to have verifications and all of those kind of things. I don't think, hospitals are gonna start running on MCPs in the background. I don't think so.
Somebody who's working there probably is
Yeah. And then they're gonna get sued, and then everything is gonna fix itself.
Some hard lessons will be learned.
Yeah, for sure.
Running of them, just curious if you guys saw there.
Yeah, just to like touch on that a little bit, I think you're by the way, absolutely right about the security implications, and I think security roles are going to become more important than ever now. Just quickly validating what you said, but also I don't think we're going to end up in a world where like one of those is a paradigm that exists versus the other. In fact, when MCP was first released, the features that I liked the most, the servers that like were released as like examples that I liked the most, were the ones that had to do with your local computer, like accessing your file system, like storing memory as like a file in your file system. Anything along those lines was a lot more interesting to me at first. And I think there's going to continue to be a lot of use cases like that. Somebody mentioned it earlier, like you don't want to send your entire code for verification to some remote server. But it would be real nice if you had some sort of like type checking maybe not MCP, but type checking thing that runs locally on your computer. So I think that both will continue to exist. It will just depend on like what the context is.
So actually, I have a question, sorry, as well. Like, I think non-dev oriented MCPs, like local ones, are gonna just die. And even just the local ones, I think they're gonna be, far, very rare, I think. You're right about memory and all of those like local testing, but GitHub doesn't need a local MCP server and all of that. So how do you think about that? Do you agree with the statement, or?
I don't know. I think that there's like a little bit of like a discovery phase that I think we need to do about why you need MCPs in certain contexts and when do you need just Claude Code running on your computer. Claude Code has just wiped away such an entire class of problems for me, at least recently, that I'm like starting to question a lot of my baseline assumptions. Non-developer use cases. Yeah, I mean, like it used to be that like there weren't any non-developer use cases with computers, right? But then we added UIs around them and made them really, really easy to use. And I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen with MCP. What I am saying is that it's a new protocol. It's a new way of thinking about things. And when these things get released into the world, they're going to intentionally be oriented towards the developers that are going to be building tooling around them. And I think it's everybody in here's room to go and like make those ergonomic for local usage. Or if that's not the right paradigm, then don't. Then host it somewhere on a server. But I think that I think that there's going to be a little bit of a discovery phase.
Great. That's time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.